Hey guys, welcome back to another build showcase where I'll be taking a deep dive into the more commonly used setups, explain how they work, and point out some recommended epics you can use alongside the core pieces. Today I'd like to introduce to you another very popular entry-level setup that will become even more powerful in the future, Archon. The build's name is naturally a direct reference to the Protoss Archon from the StarCraft series, which has very little health, but a gigantic shield that recharges over time. Incredibly fitting, as the build mainly revolves around the suppressed mana bracelet, which has the unique effect of depleting your MP upon taking damage before it starts draining HP, though at the cost of reducing your maximum HP to 1%. This will definitely feel very strange at first. Rewiring your brain and convincing yourself that you're not in constant danger is probably going to take some time. Also, I'd like to point out that the item is currently mistranslated in Global and actually increases your MP costs by 50%. Not a huge issue for gameplay, but something to take note of for some equipment choices. So, as your survivability now depends on your MP pool, this effectively means that HP recovery consumables, skills, and equipment options will do absolutely nothing for you. At least, for now. In a later Epic Rebalance update, the Bracelet will replenish your MP by 25% of recovered HP from skills and equipment options, but not consumables. This is mostly for improving survivability in party play. Additionally, its second option will also provide a significant amount of damage value and 5% skill attack when over 75% MP, so you'll be rewarded for playing well or chugging mana aids constantly while base tanking everything. Either way, you'll mainly be relying on MP recovery from equipment to manage your MP pool, and consumables when you take too many hits you shouldn't have taken. And even though this might sound a little dangerous, overall it's actually a very durable build that can prove to be even sturdier than conventional ones. So now let's get into what makes the setup so effective by introducing the core pieces of the build. Although technically the bracelet is all you need to get this build started, there are a handful of epics that this build can make the most of, like the Black Star Necklace, which provides a significant amount of damage value, 5% skill attack, and 20% to all speeds while under half health, as well as 15 elemental damage. This easily makes it the best necklace for the build, as the bracelet automatically fulfills its conditions and more or less outperforms both Heightened Fury and Locked Area. Although in theory, Locked Area could outdamage the Black Star by a very small amount, not only does it require 400 million gold, you'll also be missing out on 20% speeds, which could translate into increased overall DPS, clearing speed, as well as survivability. Similarly, we have the Destroyed Life sub-equipment, which provides high damage value and 5% skill attack while under half health, as well as a very welcome 20% critical chance. Additionally, with the Rebalance update, the skill attack bonus gets increased to a respectable 7%, easily becoming the best option for this slot. They'll even outperform the highly coveted optical combat glasses from Meister's Laboratory, though you might want to grab it anyway if you plan to transition to a different build later on. And next we have the Genius Engineer's Belt again. And you might be wondering, wait a minute, that increases my MP costs by 100%. Isn't that detrimental to my survival? So the answer is, not really. The 3500 MP on hit option more than makes up for it, and the damage value from spending MP is still quite strong. Now, there are some classes or builds that can instead use the Guideline Belt, especially ones that specifically use Rhombus Earrings and the Grey Cat Stone. Battle Mage, Culmination Swiftmaster, and Battle Crusader are some prime examples. And technically, the Rightful Duty Belt is also worth considering for some classes, but you'll end up having to manually input some of your skills. If that's fine with you, this is worth considering for raw damage increases, and I will be covering this piece in detail when I go over the popular command setting. Eventually. So look forward to that video, I guess, if you're not concerned about your carpal tunnels. Up next we have the Manipulation Shoulders. On skill casts, these will provide a significant amount of damage value, as well as 6% skill attack for 30 seconds at the cost of 30% of remaining HP. And since your maximum HP is capped at 1%, it'll only cost 0.3% HP in total. Additionally, with the Rebalance update, the skill attack bonus gets increased to 8%, and the second option's 2% HP recovery on hit will translate to MP recovery equal to 0.5% of your max HP, not a whole lot, but it's something. I will note, however, that while the buff lasts 30 seconds, the cooldown is also 30 seconds, which doesn't sound like a problem, but the truth is, it's possible that the buff will expire while you're in the middle of a skill animation, especially ones with long channeling like Awakenings. It can be difficult to keep track of when it's about to expire and when it's already reapplied, so unfortunately you're just gonna have to deal with it. Despite this flaw, the shoulders are still extremely powerful, and there's really only one alternative that I'll get into a little bit later in the video. So now let's talk about shoes. My first recommendation is the Accelerator. Just like the Engineer's Belt, these boots have another 100% MP cost increase and 3500 MP on hit. Additionally, they provide a very generous 12% cooldown reduction, and they also increase your damage value for every 20,000 remaining MP, which you're going to have a lot of with this build. Do be wary though, as your skill attack does get reduced by 4% when you're under 60% MP. With the rebalance update, this penalty does get changed to trigger at 30% instead though, which is perfect as most consumables heal for 30% anyway, so it'll be much easier to break that. Furthermore, the second option's cooldown reduction gets increased to 15%, and the item's overall base damage value will be increased by more than 50%, making these my top recommendation in general. Alternatively, you can use the Desperate Footfall shoes, which provide a larger damage value bonus for every 10% loss in HP, and since the Bracelet reduces your maximum HP down to 1%, you'll just automatically get all 10 stacks up front, which doesn't make mathematical sense, but don't worry about it. And that's about all they offer for now. However, after the rebalance update, their first option will also provide 7% skill attack, as long as you have at least 5 stacks, which you'll obviously have with the setup. Incredibly strong and certainly worth considering if you don't really need the cooldown reduction and MP recovery from Accelerator. Naturally, there are other shoes you could use with the setup, like the Mobile Impotent Obsession shoes, which provide 15 and later 20 elemental damage, as well as up to 15% cooldown reduction based on your highest elemental resist. They technically have a slight edge on the Accelerator boots, but not only do you miss out on MP recovery, you also have to find a way to stack an elemental resist to 75. Which isn't too hard, but still an extra step for relatively similar results. And lastly, we have the high-tech mobility enhancing boots, which requires you to manually input your skills for increased damage and cooldown reduction. Very powerful if you're both capable and unconcerned about carpal tunnel syndrome. And again, I'll be covering these in detail in a future video, so you can find out more about that command setting whenever I manage to finish it myself. And now with those out of the way, we can move on to general recommendations for the other slots, like the Chaos Curtains. These pants are currently very powerful as they provide a staggering amount of damage value based on your current HP, and will outstrip most of the other options available to us right now. However, the rebalance update will actually reduce the amount of damage value from both options, moving most of it onto the other core pieces. So once that arrives, it's not a bad idea to consider switching to one of the usual suspects. My top recommendation, of course, is any of the 4 elemental damage epics if you're just looking for raw damage output, as they provide up to 45 elemental damage to start, and an extra 20 elemental damage for 10 seconds upon getting hit. Very strong choice. Otherwise, unlimited cybernetics are pretty decent if you're looking for some more cooldown reduction, and Jade Ghost Tacits are a good middle ground for a little bit of everything, though naturally you'll need 120 slots in your avatar inventory filled. As for tops, my first recommendations are the Shadow Black Suit and Genius Engineer's Top for their cooldown recovery options. While the HP on hit is useless for now, after the rebalance update you'll get 875 MP with the Engineer's Top, and varying amounts with the Shadow Black Suit depending on the size of your health pool. Not a whole lot, but it's there. However, if you need a more substantial source of MP recovery, the Reversible Leather Coat and Ultimate Generator are also worth considering. Though they do both have 3500 MP on hit, there are some key differences I'd like to bring up. Firstly, the Reversible Leather Coat will have a significantly higher base damage value than the Ultimate Generator with the rebalance update. This does come at the cost of increasing your MP consumption by 50%, so technically you're gaining a little bit less MP as you're spending more of it, but it's mostly inconsequential. Whereas the Ultimate Generator also has 2200 HP on hit, which will translate to 550 MP after the rebalance update, for a grand total of 4050 MP on hit. While neither of these pieces translate into an overall increase in damage, the extra MP recovery does allow for a more reckless playstyle, so they're worth considering, especially early on. And lastly, if you don't really need the extra cooldown recovery or survivability, I'd recommend considering the Abyss Reactor, which just provides 30 elemental damage as long as your total elemental resists are under 100, which they most likely will be with this build. However, make sure you do not set your first option's element to the one you want to inflict for damage, as it'll reduce that element's damage by 10. On the other hand, if your total resists happen to be slightly above 100, you could swap it to a different element to drop its resists by 10. Pretty neat, and overall a very solid option for some raw damage for any build. As for rings, I'm sure you already know the two-tone ring is king, as it provides a 10% HP barrier, a lot of speed, and up to 30% cooldown recovery. Everything you could ever want from a single piece. But if you don't feel like you need any more speed or cooldown recovery, I'd like to present to you an extremely underrated epic, the Guardian Dragon's Protection Ring. If your class happens to have a relatively decent level 45 skill, this thing can prove to be surprisingly powerful. Essentially, it'll increase your 45 skill by 10 levels, and every time you cast it, it'll reduce the skill bonuses by 1, but also provide 20 elemental damage for 30 seconds. And although the effect can eventually reduce your skill all the way down to level 10, because it also resets the skill level bonuses every 2 minutes spent under 70% HP, you'll likely only manage to reduce it by 5 or 6 levels before it fully replenishes. Additionally, after the rebalance update, the elemental damage bonus gets increased to 30, making it even stronger, so definitely give it a shot if that sounds worthwhile for your build. And last but not least, if your class happens to innately inflict either burn or shock, the red life and glowing life rings are certainly worth considering for the skill attack and elemental damage bonuses if the two-tone ring isn't necessary for your build. Otherwise, two-tone it up, it's really good. Magic stones are kind of a wild card. Great Cat Stone is great for classes that can benefit a lot from increasing the damage of their 15 to 35 skills, but it does require you to use basic attacks. Tactical Wheel Drone is great for very melee classes like Monk, Female Brawler, Rogue, Elven Knight, either of the Grapplers, etc. Restrained Spirit Bead is also fantastic for some speed and cooldown reduction, given you have 20 creatures on your character. Not a bad choice. And similar to the Guardian Dragon Ring, the Dragon Heart Stone is also a viable option, especially if your class has a relatively decent level 70 skill. The one downside to this is that most classes have very long cooldowns on their 70 skill, so you may not be able to maintain the 20 and later 30 elemental damage effect consistently if you don't have enough cooldown reduction or recovery in your build, so keep that in mind. If you just want a magic stone without any weird constraints or conditions, you could just use a Lie After Lie for some extra elemental damage instead. Ideally, you'll want at least a 25 elemental damage enchant on it, but an 18 will suffice early on. And lastly, a situational pick is the Cursed Heart Stone, which offers a massive 15% damage increase on counterattacks. If you're neutralizing bosses fairly quickly though, I wouldn't recommend this just yet. Otherwise, if you're just countering a boss until it dies, then absolutely go nuts with this thing. The 1% MP loss every 3 seconds is kind of annoying, but with both Engineer's Belt and Accelerator Boots, you'll probably be alright, and the damage is absolutely worth it. Also, I'd like to note that this stone will see way more use when we get Ispins, as you'll more or less be getting counters for the entirety of each fight. So definitely consider switching to it once your character gets to that point. And finally, earrings are, yet again, completely dependent on your class and build. Corrupt Soul earrings are the safe choice, as they increase Clear Cube skill damage by 8% and will later reduce their cooldowns by 10%. The Surging Hazy Lament is a very niche pick right now, but later becomes very powerful, as it'll increase skill attack for skills with at least a 12-second cooldown by 15%, while also reducing cooldowns by 10% if the total between your attack and casting speeds is under 100%. Though going over 100% does increase your cooldowns by 5%, it's definitely worth the damage increase if most of your class's damage is coming from medium to high cooldown skills. And of course we have the Acrobatic Rhombus earrings, which will reduce the damage of your awakenings by 25% and increase your cube skill cooldowns by 15%, but increase your advanced skills damages by 20% and decrease the cooldown of non-cube skills by 30%. Again, great for classes like Battle Mage, Soulbender, Asura, Battle Crusader, Culmination, Swift Master, Short Sword, Sword Master, etc. Lastly, if you're one of the few classes that can inherently inflict bleed with your attacks, the Cursed Bridle is also worth considering for some skill tank and cooldown recovery. Honestly, a very solid choice. And now a word from our sponsor for this video, Mana Burn. Sorry, I had to. But in all seriousness, I highly suggest you go watch my video on the setup, at least until I finish going over the core pieces and the math surrounding it. If you have watched it or already understand the setup's concept, it turns out that Mana Burn and Archon are actually surprisingly compatible. Since you're already using Engineer's Belt and the Suppressed Mana Bracelet already increases your MP costs by 50%, you could use Ender's Gaze for 175%, Reversible Coat for 50%, and of course the Engineer's Boots for another 100%, granting a total of 475 MP cost increase, translating into 23.75% skill attack from the boots. The downside to this build is that your MP costs will be very high, so keeping your MP above 75% may prove to be a challenge if your class's baseline MP consumption is already a problem. I don't really recommend this hybrid setting for long-term use, but it's not a bad idea to try it out until we get the buffs to Archon's core epics. It could be worth a shot, and who knows, maybe you'll actually end up enjoying it even more. And that's that. To review, the Archon setup is a fantastic entry-level setup for endgame progression that'll become progressively more powerful with future updates and gear selections. If you're having trouble looking for something that isn't mana burn or status-centric, I highly recommend you give this a try. You may be worried about constantly having to manage your MP pool, but I assure you, with some practice, you'll barely have to pay attention to it. Also, I stream on Twitch, usually from around 5 or 6 p.m. Pacific, on most days of the week. So if you'd like to ask me any questions directly, feel free to drop by. I also have a Discord server if you'd like to get in touch while I'm offline, so I'll leave a link to both of those in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I hope this inspired you to try and experiment with the build yourself. And tune in next time, where I'll go over the very powerful command setting centered on manual inputs. Eventually, when I finish the build on my troubleshooter, which is probably going to take a while. Anyway, happy grinding folks, and have a good one. Cheers!